What happens when Leonardo DiCaprio walks onto the stage of The View expecting a normal conversation, only to find himself in the middle of a moment that nobody in the studio saw coming? The cameras are already rolling. The audience is waiting. The hosts are prepared with the questions they believe will create another memorable daytime interview. But within minutes, the atmosphere changes completely. Because this is no longer just a celebrity appearance. It becomes a clash between two powerful personalities, two different perspectives, and one question that forces Leonardo DiCaprio to respond in a way viewers never expected. For years, Leonardo has been one of the most recognizable faces in the world. An award-winning actor, a Hollywood icon, and a public figure whose opinions often reach millions. But when someone with that level of influence sits across from Behar, there is always the possibility that the conversation will go somewhere unpredictable. Joy is known for asking direct questions and pushing guests beyond comfortable answers. She has interviewed countless celebrities, politicians, and public figures, but this time, the dynamic feels different. Because Leonardo isn't facing a simple question about a movie, a role, or a new project. He's facing questions about his choices, his image, and whether the person people see in public truly matches the person behind the headlines. And when Behar asks the question that puts him under the spotlight, Leonardo doesn't respond the way most people expect. He doesn't avoid it. He doesn't simply laugh it off. He doesn't give the kind of carefully prepared answer audiences have heard countless times before. Instead, he pauses. And in that brief moment of silence, everyone in the studio realizes something has changed. The conversation is no longer following the usual script. What happens next leaves the audience watching closely, the hosts reconsidering their approach, and viewers everywhere debating whether they just witnessed a powerful moment of honesty or one of the most unexpected exchanges ever seen on daytime television. Because sometimes the most unforgettable moments aren't planned. They happen when a question meets an answer that nobody was prepared for. The atmosphere inside the View studio has always carried a unique energy. The bright lights, the live audience, the familiar panel, and the unpredictable conversations have made the show one of daytime television's most recognizable platforms. Every episode follows a familiar rhythm. A guest walks onto the stage. The audience welcomes them. The hosts begin with casual questions. There are laughs, stories, and moments designed to entertain millions of viewers watching from home. But sometimes, a conversation takes a completely different direction. Sometimes, a single question changes the entire mood of the room. And on this day, that shift begins the moment Leonardo DiCaprio takes his seat. For decades, Leonardo has been more than just an actor. He has become a global name recognized far beyond Hollywood. From award-winning performances to his involvement in major social and environmental discussions, his career has placed him under constant public attention. With that level of fame comes something else: scrutiny. Every statement is analyzed. Every decision is discussed. Every public appearance becomes another opportunity for people to question the person behind the image. And that is exactly what makes this conversation different. Because when Leonardo sits across from Behar, he isn't simply being asked about his latest work or his career achievements. The discussion quickly moves towards something much more personal. His reputation. His influence. The expectations placed on people who have a powerful public voice. Behar has built her reputation on asking the questions many people are thinking, but may not always say out loud. She knows how to challenge guests, how to create honest conversations, and how to push beyond carefully prepared responses. So when she begins questioning Leonardo, the room immediately senses that this will not be an ordinary interview. At first, everything appears normal. Leonardo remains calm. Joy maintains her familiar confidence. The audience watches with curiosity, expecting another entertaining exchange between a famous guest and an experienced host. But beneath the surface, something begins to change. The questions become sharper. The answers become more thoughtful. And the space between a simple interview and a serious conversation starts to disappear. Because the biggest moments in television history rarely happen when everything goes exactly as planned. They happen when someone asks a difficult question. They happen when someone refuses to give an easy answer. And they happen when millions of people watching suddenly feel like they are witnessing something real. As Leonardo DiCaprio and Behar continue their conversation, the tone inside the studio begins to transform. What started as a routine appearance slowly becomes a discussion about trust, responsibility, and what it means to stand behind the words you share with the world. And before the conversation is over, everyone watching will have to decide for themselves what they just witnessed. A carefully controlled celebrity interview? Or a rare moment when two powerful voices challenged each other without looking away? The moment Leonardo DiCaprio walks onto the stage, the entire atmosphere inside the studio changes. The reaction from the audience is immediate. The applause rises through the room, filling the space with the kind of energy reserved for someone whose name has been recognized around the world for decades. Leonardo smiles, acknowledges the crowd, and makes his way toward the table. On the surface, everything looks exactly like a traditional celebrity interview. A famous guest, a familiar host, a live audience ready for entertainment. But underneath that routine, there is a different feeling building. Because everyone in the room knows that Leonardo DiCaprio is not just another guest. He carries decades of history with him. He is known for some of the most memorable performances in modern cinema, for receiving one of the industry's highest honors, and for using his platform to speak about issues that extend far beyond Hollywood. That influence is exactly what makes his appearances different. When someone reaches that level of fame, every conversation becomes bigger than the person sitting in the chair. Every answer is examined. Every reaction is interpreted. And every question has the potential to become a headline. Across the table, Joy Behar watches carefully. She understands the weight of the moment. She has interviewed countless personalities over the years, and she knows that the most memorable conversations often happen when guests are pushed beyond their comfort zones. The audience notices the dynamic almost immediately. Leonardo appears composed, calm, and prepared. His body language suggests confidence, but there is also a sense that he knows this conversation could go in unexpected directions. Joy, meanwhile, has that familiar energy that viewers recognize instantly. She is engaged, curious, and ready to challenge the person sitting across from her. For a brief moment, everything feels normal. The introduction is complete. The applause fades. The conversation begins. But then something subtle happens. The tone changes. It is not because anyone raises their voice. It is not because there is immediate conflict. It is something much quieter. A question. A pause. A moment where everyone realizes this might not be the predictable interview they expected. The other hosts begin paying closer attention. The audience leans in. Even the smallest reactions suddenly feel important because everyone senses that the conversation is moving towards something deeper. Leonardo has spent years answering questions from reporters, interviewers, and fans around the world. He knows how to handle pressure. He knows how to stay composed. But this time, the focus is different. This is not only about his career. This is about the person behind the public image. And as Joy prepares to ask the first challenging question, the room becomes quieter. Because everyone is about to find out whether this will be another polished celebrity appearance, or the beginning of a conversation that nobody expected. The first question arrives, and within seconds, the entire direction of the conversation begins to change. At the beginning, it appears like a standard celebrity interview, the kind of exchange audiences have seen countless times before. A famous actor sits down, the host asks about his career, and the conversation moves comfortably from one topic to another. But Joy Behar takes a different approach. Instead of staying on the surface, she goes directly toward the questions many viewers have been asking themselves. Questions about fame. Questions about influence. Questions about whether a public figure's actions truly match the messages they share with the world. The room feels different almost immediately. The audience, expecting a light and entertaining conversation, becomes more focused. The casual energy begins to disappear, replaced by a sense of anticipation. Because this is the moment when a normal interview starts becoming something much bigger. Joy looks across the table and challenges Leonardo with a question that puts his public image under the spotlight. For someone who has spent years in front of cameras, this is familiar territory. Leonardo has answered difficult questions before. He has faced criticism, pressure, and intense public attention throughout his career. But there is a difference between answering a question about a movie and answering a question about yourself. The first one is about a performance. The second one is about credibility. And that is exactly where the conversation begins to shift. Instead of immediately offering a quick explanation or a carefully prepared response, Leonardo pauses. That pause becomes one of the most important moments of the conversation. Because in live television, silence can say just as much as words. The audience watches closely. The hosts wait. Joy keeps her focus on him, expecting an answer. And then Leonardo responds. Not with anger. Not with frustration. Not with an attempt to change the subject. Instead, he acknowledges the complexity of the issue. He explains that many public discussions are often reduced to simple accusations, while the reality behind them can be much more complicated. The answer catches people off guard because it does not follow the pattern many expect from celebrity interviews. Usually, when a famous person faces criticism, the instinct is to defend themselves immediately. But Leonardo takes a different path. He shifts the conversation from a personal attack into a broader discussion about responsibility, systems, and the challenges of creating change. That response changes the energy inside the studio. Joy notices it. The audience notices it. And suddenly, the conversation is no longer just about Leonardo DiCaprio. It becomes a discussion about a much larger question. How should society judge people who speak about important issues while still being imperfect themselves? Joy does not let the moment pass. She pushes further. Because from her perspective, the audience deserves a direct answer. If someone has a powerful voice and encourages others to make changes, should they not be held to the same standard? The question creates tension again. The room becomes quiet. Leonardo listens carefully. He understands that the challenge is not simply about defending himself. It is about addressing the bigger expectation placed on anyone who chooses to influence public conversations. And this is where the dynamic between Leonardo and Joy begins to evolve. At first, it seems like a typical interview with a host challenging a guest. But slowly, it becomes something different. Two people questioning each other. Two perspectives colliding. Two different ideas about what accountability really means. And as Joy prepares to continue pressing him, everyone in the studio realizes that this conversation is only getting started. The conversation has already moved beyond a typical celebrity appearance. What started as a simple interview has now become a test of how two strong personalities handle disagreement in front of a live audience. And as Leonardo DiCaprio continues answering, something unexpected begins to happen. The more Joy Behar challenges him, the more Leonardo refuses to follow the usual pattern. Many guests, when confronted with difficult questions, instinctively move toward safety. They give short answers, avoid specific points, or redirect the conversation toward more comfortable topics. But Leonardo does something different. He stays in the moment. He listens carefully. He takes his time. And instead of trying to escape the pressure, he engages with it. That changes the entire energy inside the studio. Joy notices that she is not getting the quick defensive reaction that often comes during uncomfortable interviews. Leonardo remains composed, but his answers begin carrying more weight. The audience starts paying closer attention. Because this is no longer about who can win an argument. It is about whether two people with completely different roles in the conversation can actually challenge each other honestly. Joy leans further into the discussion. She brings the focus back to the central issue. When someone has a global platform, should they be expected to meet a higher standard? It is a question that goes beyond one person. It applies to actors, politicians, business leaders, and anyone whose words influence millions of people. Leonardo understands the point behind the question. He does not deny that public figures should be questioned. Instead, he argues that accountability should be applied in a way that looks at the full picture. A person can have flaws and still contribute to positive change. A person can make mistakes and still work toward improvement. The room becomes quieter as the discussion becomes more thoughtful. The audience is no longer reacting only to the tension. They are listening to the ideas being exchanged. Joy continues pushing, because she knows viewers at home may still have the same question. If someone asks others to change, should they not first prove that they have changed themselves? The challenge is direct. The moment is uncomfortable. But Leonardo does not appear frustrated. Instead, he acknowledges the difficulty of the question. He admits that public figures cannot expect automatic trust simply because of their fame or success. Trust has to be earned over time, through actions, through consistency, through the choices people make when nobody is watching. That answer creates a noticeable shift. Because instead of presenting himself as someone who has all the answers, Leonardo presents himself as someone who is still part of the conversation. And that is what surprises many people. The audience expected a debate. They expected disagreement. They expected one side to overpower the other. But what they are witnessing is something more complicated. A celebrity being questioned, a host being challenged, and a conversation that refuses to fit into a simple headline. Across the table, Joy studies Leonardo more carefully now. The tone has changed. She is still asking difficult questions, but the exchange has become less about confrontation and more about understanding where each side is coming from. The other hosts remain engaged, sensing that this has moved far beyond the original topic. Because when a conversation reaches this point, something interesting happens. The person being questioned is no longer the only one under pressure. The questions themselves begin to be examined. And as Joy prepares her next challenge, the audience realizes that the balance of the conversation is beginning to shift. Leonardo DiCaprio walked onto the stage as the guest. But now he is becoming something else, a participant in a much larger debate. And the next question will push that debate even further. The next question changes the entire atmosphere inside the studio. Until this point, the conversation has been a careful exchange of ideas. Joy Behar has challenged Leonardo DiCaprio, and Leonardo has responded with calm explanations. But now, the discussion moves into more personal territory. The focus is no longer just on what he believes. It is about whether people should trust him. Joy understands that this is the question many viewers are waiting for. Because when someone becomes a global figure, their words carry influence. Their opinions reach millions. Their choices become part of public conversations. And with that influence comes a difficult reality. People do not only listen to what public figures say, they watch what they do. Joy leans into that point. She brings the conversation back to Leonardo himself and asks whether there is a difference between speaking about important issues and actually living according to those principles. The question creates a moment of silence, not because it is unexpected, but because it goes directly to the heart of the conversation. The audience waits for Leonardo's response. This is the kind of moment where many guests might become defensive. They might try to explain away criticism or quickly move toward another topic. But Leonardo takes a different approach. He does not rush. He does not interrupt. He allows the question to fully exist before answering. And when he finally responds, his answer takes the room by surprise. Instead of presenting himself as someone who has everything figured out, he acknowledges something much more complicated. He admits that no person is perfect. Not celebrities. Not activists. Not leaders. Not anyone. The idea creates a different kind of tension. Because admitting imperfection is easy when it is a general statement. But acknowledging it while millions of people are watching is much harder. Leonardo explains that the goal should not be to find people who never make mistakes. The goal should be to recognize whether people are willing to learn, improve, and take responsibility. The audience listens carefully. The conversation has moved away from defending an image and toward examining a much deeper question. Can someone be part of a solution while still being part of the problem? That question changes everything. Because suddenly, the discussion is no longer about one actor sitting at a table. It becomes a reflection of a larger debate happening around the world. How should society judge people? Should one mistake define an entire person? Should someone lose the ability to create change because they are not perfect? Or should the focus be placed on whether their actions move in the right direction? Joy continues to challenge him. She points out that public figures often have opportunities and resources that ordinary people do not have. That difference matters. The audience understands the point. Fame brings advantages. But Leonardo responds by explaining that influence itself comes with responsibility. Having a platform means having the ability to bring attention to issues that might otherwise be ignored. The room becomes completely focused on the exchange. The energy is different now. The earlier tension has transformed into something more meaningful. The audience is no longer waiting for a dramatic argument. They are waiting to hear what comes next. Joy looks at Leonardo, searching for a direct answer. And Leonardo realizes that this is the moment where he has to go beyond explanations. He has to explain not only what he believes, but why anyone should believe him. The question hanging in the room is simple but powerful. When someone asks others to listen, what makes them worth listening to? And as Leonardo prepares his next response, everyone realizes that the conversation has reached a turning point. Because the next few words will determine whether this remains just another celebrity interview, or becomes a moment people remember long after the cameras stop rolling. The pressure inside the studio continues to build. The conversation has reached a point where neither side is simply exchanging opinions anymore. Every question carries more weight. Every answer creates another layer of discussion. Joy Behar knows the audience is still waiting for one thing. A direct answer. Not a carefully worded statement. Not a broad explanation. not a response that moves away from the original issue. She wants to know how Leonardo DiCaprio views the responsibility that comes with being one of the most recognizable people in the world. So she pushes further. The question becomes less about public image and more about accountability. Because when someone has spent decades building a reputation, protecting that reputation can become almost automatic. But Leonardo's response takes a different direction. He explains that accountability should not mean pretending to be flawless. Instead, it should mean being willing to recognize problems, accept criticism, and continue working toward improvement. The room becomes noticeably quieter. Because this is not the kind of answer people expect from a high-profile celebrity. Many public figures are trained to avoid uncomfortable moments. They know how to redirect conversations, protect their image, and move toward safer topics. But Leonardo stays with the difficult part. He acknowledges that criticism is not always something to escape from. Sometimes it is something to listen to. That response changes the dynamic between him and Joy. At the beginning of the conversation, it seemed like Joy was trying to challenge Leonardo's position. Now, the discussion has become more complex. They are exploring what accountability actually means. Joy questions whether acknowledging a problem is enough. Because saying the right words is one thing. Taking meaningful action is another. The audience understands the importance of that distinction. A powerful statement can create attention, but lasting change requires consistency. Leonardo responds by explaining that progress is rarely immediate. People and organizations often change through a series of decisions, not one single moment. He points out that expecting instant perfection can sometimes prevent people from taking the first step. The studio becomes divided in a way that makes the conversation more interesting. Some members of the audience appear to connect with his argument. Others remain skeptical. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes the discussion feel real. There is no easy answer. There is no simple winner. Just two different perspectives meeting in the middle. Joy continues questioning him because she believes public figures should be held responsible for the messages they share. Leonardo agrees with the idea of responsibility, but he challenges the idea that responsibility means never making mistakes. The difference between them becomes clear. Joy focuses on the gap between words and actions. Leonardo focuses on the importance of continued effort and broader change. Both points create tension because both touch on something people struggle with every day. How do we judge someone who is trying to create change while still being imperfect? The audience remains silent as Leonardo explains that influence can be used in different ways. A public platform can simply create attention, or it can be used to encourage people to think differently. The challenge, he explains, is not proving that someone is perfect. The challenge is determining whether their actions are meaningful. That statement creates another shift in the room. Because suddenly, the conversation is no longer about defending or criticizing one person. It becomes about a question that applies to everyone. Should people be judged only by their mistakes, or also by their efforts to improve? Joy pauses before responding. For a moment, even she seems to consider the broader idea behind his words. But she is not finished. She knows there is still one question at the center of everything. The question that viewers at home are asking. If someone wants others to trust their message, how do they prove that trust is deserved? And as Joy prepares to take the conversation there, everyone in the studio realizes the interview has entered its most important stage yet. The conversation reaches a moment nobody expected. For most of the interview, Joy Behar has been guiding the direction of the discussion. She asks the questions. She sets the pace. She decides where the conversation goes next. But then something changes. Instead of simply responding to another challenge, Leonardo DiCaprio turns the conversation around. Not aggressively, not as a way to avoid the question, but by asking something that forces everyone in the room to think. For a brief moment, the dynamic shifts. The person who walked onto the stage as the guest begins asking questions of his own. And suddenly, Joy Behar finds herself on the other side of the conversation. The audience notices immediately. The energy changes. Because interviews are usually built around a simple structure. One person asks. The other person answers. But when the guest begins questioning the purpose behind the questions themselves, the entire conversation takes on a different meaning. Leonardo looks across the table and asks whether these kinds of discussions actually create meaningful change, or whether they simply create temporary moments of attention. The question creates silence. Not because it is impossible to answer, but because it challenges the entire format of the conversation. Everyone in the studio understands the deeper meaning behind it. A difficult discussion can become powerful, but it can also become just another headline, another viral moment, another argument that disappears once the attention moves somewhere else. Joy pauses before responding. For a moment, the focus is no longer only on Leonardo's choices. It is on the responsibility of everyone involved in shaping public conversations. The hosts, the media, the audience, the people watching from home. Leonardo explains that asking hard questions matters, but so does looking beyond the surface. Because sometimes the easiest thing to do is focus on one person. It is easier to point at an individual. It is harder to examine the larger issues that influence people's decisions and behavior. That answer creates another shift. The conversation is no longer about whether Leonardo has the perfect response. It becomes about whether society approaches complicated issues in the right way. Joy listens carefully. She still challenges him, but the tone has changed. The earlier tension was built around disagreement. Now, the tension comes from two people exploring an uncomfortable idea together. And that makes the moment even more powerful, because neither side has completely defeated the other. Instead, both sides are forcing the audience to consider a different perspective. Joy argues that public figures must accept responsibility because their voices influence millions. Leonardo agrees, but adds that responsibility should include examining the bigger picture. The audience remains completely engaged. Every pause feels important. Every response feels heavier. Because the conversation has moved beyond celebrity criticism. It has become a discussion about trust, influence, and the expectations placed on people who speak publicly. Leonardo explains that meaningful conversations require more than quick reactions. They require honesty. They require people to look beyond simple answers. And most importantly, they require everyone involved to be willing to question their own position. That statement creates a rare moment of balance. The host is not simply attacking the guest. The guest is not simply defending himself. Instead, both are challenging each other. And that is what makes the exchange different. Because the most memorable conversations are not always the ones where someone wins. Sometimes they are the ones where everyone walks away thinking differently. As the discussion continues, Joy realizes that Leonardo is no longer just answering questions. He is changing the direction of the conversation. The interview has transformed from a challenge into a deeper examination of what accountability really means. And with the entire studio watching, one thing becomes clear. Leonardo DiCaprio did not come to simply defend his image. He came prepared to question the conversation itself. The conversation has reached a point where the entire room feels different. What began as a challenging interview has transformed into something far more personal. The questions are no longer only about public statements or outside opinions. Now, the focus is on Leonardo DiCaprio himself. His choices, his reputation, his credibility. And then comes the moment that surprises everyone. Instead of trying to present himself as someone who has done everything perfectly, Leonardo does something most people do not expect from someone sitting in the spotlight. He admits that he is not perfect. The answer is simple, but the impact is much bigger than anyone anticipates. Because in a world where public figures often feel pressure to appear flawless, admitting imperfection can be one of the most difficult things to do. The audience becomes quiet. Joy watches carefully. Because this is not the kind of response she expected. She was prepared for an explanation. She was prepared for a defense. But what she hears instead is something much more complicated. Leonardo acknowledges that people have every right to ask questions. He accepts that anyone with a public platform should be open to criticism. But he also explains that being imperfect does not automatically mean someone has nothing valuable to contribute. That idea changes the direction of the conversation once again. Because the debate is no longer about whether a person has made mistakes. Everyone has. The deeper question becomes whether those mistakes prevent someone from trying to make a difference. The audience begins to understand the complexity of the discussion. A person can recognize problems while still being connected to them. A person can have flaws while still working toward improvement. A person can be criticized and still continue the effort to create change. Leonardo explains that accountability is not about claiming to have all the answers. It is about being willing to listen, reflect, and take responsibility. Those words create a different kind of reaction in the studio. The tension is still there, but it has changed. It is no longer the tension of an argument. It is the tension of people thinking. Joy continues to challenge him. She points out that when someone has fame, wealth, and influence, expectations naturally become higher. People do not only look at what famous individuals say, they look at whether their behavior supports those words. It is a difficult point to ignore. And Leonardo does not ignore it. Instead, he acknowledges that public trust cannot be demanded. It has to be earned, not through one interview, not through one statement, but through patterns of actions over time. The room becomes completely focused, because this answer is not designed to end the discussion. It actually opens the door to a bigger one. What does real accountability look like? Is it admitting every mistake? Is it changing every decision immediately? Or is it the willingness to continue improving despite criticism? Leonardo suggests that progress is not always a straight path. People often want simple stories. A hero, a villain, someone who is completely right, someone who is completely wrong. But real life rarely works that way. Sometimes people are complicated. Sometimes they are both part of a problem and part of an effort to solve it. That statement creates one of the most unexpected moments of the interview. Because instead of trying to escape criticism, Leonardo accepts that criticism exists. He does not ask people to blindly trust him. He asks them to judge based on actions, consistency, and long-term impact. Joy listens. The audience listens. And for a moment, the entire studio seems to understand that this conversation has moved far beyond one celebrity. It has become a discussion about something everyone can relate to. How do we decide whether someone deserves to be heard? Not because they are perfect, but because they are willing to be honest about their imperfections. And as the conversation continues, one question remains at the center of everything. If perfection is impossible, what should people expect from those who try to create change? That question is about to take the discussion even deeper. The conversation has now reached a completely different level. What started as a discussion about Leonardo DiCaprio has slowly transformed into something much bigger. The focus is no longer only on one celebrity, one interview, or one controversial topic. It has become a conversation about influence, responsibility, and the complicated relationship between public figures and the people who follow them. Joy Behar continues to challenge Leonardo, but the tone has changed. Earlier, every question felt like a test. Now, every question feels like an attempt to understand something deeper. Because the real issue is not whether Leonardo has faced criticism. The real issue is why people expect so much from those who have a powerful voice. A celebrity can influence conversations around the world. A single statement can reach millions of people within minutes. A public appearance can change the way audiences think about important issues. And with that level of influence comes a difficult question. Does having a platform also mean having a greater responsibility? Joy believes that it does. She explains that when someone becomes a symbol for a cause or an idea, people naturally compare their words with their actions. They want consistency. They want honesty. They want to know that the person delivering the message truly believes in what they are saying. The audience understands the point. Because trust is not built only through what someone says. It is built through what they repeatedly do. Leonardo listens carefully. Instead of rejecting the criticism, he acknowledges the importance of the question. He explains that public figures should be questioned. They should be examined. They should be challenged. But he also argues that meaningful discussions require looking beyond individual moments. Because sometimes the world focuses so much on judging one person that it forgets to examine the larger issues surrounding the situation. The room becomes thoughtful. The conversation is no longer about defending a reputation. It is about understanding how change actually happens. Leonardo explains that expecting perfection from people can sometimes create an impossible standard. If society only accepts people who have never made mistakes, then many important conversations may never happen. Because every person has contradictions. Every person has moments where their actions do not completely match their intentions. The question is what happens after those moments. Do they ignore criticism? Do they refuse to change? Or do they recognize the problem and try to move forward? That idea creates one of the most powerful moments of the discussion, because it challenges the audience to look beyond simple labels. Instead of asking whether someone is completely good or completely wrong, the conversation becomes about growth, about effort, about whether actions over time reveal genuine commitment. Joy pushes back again. She reminds Leonardo that ordinary people often feel frustrated when they hear powerful individuals speak about issues while living lives that seem completely different from their own. That frustration is real. People want leaders, celebrities, and influential figures to understand the struggles of everyday life. They want to know that their voices are not being ignored. Leonardo acknowledges that disconnect. He explains that influence should not create distance. It should create responsibility. A platform should not only be used to gain attention. It should be used to encourage discussion, awareness, and action. The audience remains completely engaged, because the conversation has reached a point where both sides are making arguments that are difficult to dismiss. Joy represents the demand for accountability. Leonardo represents the idea that progress can come from imperfect people trying to create positive change. Neither side completely backs away. Neither side claims victory. And that is exactly what makes the exchange so compelling. It feels less like a debate designed to produce a winner, and more like a conversation designed to make people think. As the studio remains quiet, everyone begins to realize something important. The biggest question was never whether Leonardo DiCaprio is perfect. The bigger question is whether anyone with influence can ever be perfect enough to satisfy everyone watching. And as Joy prepares her next challenge, the conversation moves closer to the one question that has been waiting beneath everything from the beginning. When millions of people are listening, what makes someone truly worth believing? The studio has reached a moment of complete silence. The conversation that began with a challenging question has now transformed into something much deeper. The audience is no longer waiting for a dramatic comeback or a headline-making response. They are waiting for the answer to one question that has been at the center of everything. Why should people believe you? Joy Behar looks across the table at Leonardo DiCaprio. It is not a casual question. It is not meant to create a quick reaction. It is the question that connects every topic they have discussed so far. Fame, influence, responsibility, trust. Because when someone has spent decades in the public eye, the biggest challenge is not becoming known. The biggest challenge is convincing people that the person they see publicly is the same person behind the image. The room becomes completely still. The audience waits. The other hosts remain quiet. Everyone understands that this is the moment where Leonardo's response matters more than anything he has said before. For a few seconds, Leonardo does not answer. He looks down briefly, not because he has no response, but because he understands the weight of the question. This is not a question about a movie role. It is not about awards or achievements. It is about credibility. And then Leonardo says something that surprises everyone. He does not tell the audience they should automatically trust him. He does not point to his success as proof. He does not suggest that his intentions alone should be enough. Instead, he says the opposite. People should question him. The answer creates an immediate reaction, because it is not the response many expect from someone defending their reputation. Most people in the spotlight want to be believed. They want audiences to focus on their accomplishments, their good intentions, and their positive actions. But Leonardo takes a different approach. He explains that public figures should not receive automatic trust simply because they are famous. An award, a successful career, a large platform. None of those things should remove the responsibility of being questioned. The audience listens closely, because this answer changes the entire direction of the conversation. The issue is no longer about proving that Leonardo is right. It becomes about how people decide who deserves to be heard. Leonardo explains that skepticism is not the enemy. Questions are important. Doubt can be useful. Holding people accountable is necessary. But he argues that there is a difference between meaningful criticism and criticism that only focuses on attacking one individual while ignoring the larger picture. That idea creates another shift inside the studio. Joy listens carefully, because the answer does not completely dismiss her argument. Instead, it meets the challenge directly. Leonardo accepts that people have reasons to question him. But he also asks viewers to consider what happens after the questioning. Do people only look for contradictions? Or do they also look at patterns over time? Do they only focus on moments of imperfection? Or do they examine whether someone's actions show a genuine attempt to improve? The audience begins to understand the complexity of the discussion. Because trust is rarely created by one perfect moment. It is built through repeated choices, through consistency, through actions that continue even when nobody is watching. Joy leans forward again. She understands that Leonardo has shifted the conversation, but she still wants clarity, because viewers at home are asking the same thing. If people are supposed to judge based on actions, what actions should they look at? Leonardo responds by explaining that no public figure should be judged only by words. Words matter, But actions reveal commitment, and time reveals patterns. The answer creates a different kind of reaction from the audience. There is no dramatic applause, no sudden celebration, just quiet attention, because the conversation has moved into an uncomfortable but important place. A place where simple answers no longer work. The debate is no longer about whether Leonardo DiCaprio is a hero or a hypocrite. It is about something much harder to define. How do imperfect people earn trust? How much should intention matter? And how much should people be judged by their ability to change? For the first time during the interview, the tension between Leonardo and Joy feels completely different. They are still challenging each other. They still have different perspectives. But now, the conversation is built on a shared understanding that difficult questions matter. And sometimes the most honest answer is not asking people to believe you. It is giving them a reason to keep questioning you. As the audience absorbs Leonardo's response, one thing becomes clear. The interview has moved far beyond celebrity headlines. It has become a conversation about something everyone understands. Trust is not something people receive because of who they are. It is something they build through what they do. And with that realization hanging in the air, the conversation moves into its final and most unexpected stage. The moment Leonardo DiCaprio finishes his response, something changes inside the studio. For a few seconds, nobody moves. The kind of silence that follows a powerful statement is different from ordinary silence. It is not uncomfortable. It is not empty. It is the silence of people processing what they just heard. The audience, who had been reacting to every challenge and every response throughout the conversation, now sits quietly. Because this exchange has moved beyond a simple disagreement. It has become something much more complicated. A conversation where neither side completely walks away victorious. A conversation where both the questions and the answers carry weight. Joy Behar looks at Leonardo carefully. The confidence she had at the beginning of the interview is still there, but the energy has changed. She came prepared to challenge him. She came prepared to push him toward difficult answers. And she did. But what she did not expect was a response that would turn the focus back onto the larger issue. The room begins to react. A few audience members start clapping. Then a few more join in. The applause grows slowly. Not the kind of applause that comes after a planned television moment. Something different. It feels uncertain, thoughtful. Almost like the audience is not simply celebrating one person, but acknowledging the importance of the conversation itself. The other hosts exchange looks. They understand that something unusual has happened. This was supposed to be another segment, another celebrity interview, another conversation that would end when the cameras stopped rolling. But instead, it became a moment where both sides were forced to examine their own positions. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere changes as well. Producers and crew members who have watched thousands of television moments recognize when something feels different. They know the difference between a planned discussion and an unpredictable exchange that captures people's attention. And this feels different, because the power of the moment did not come from someone winning an argument. It came from the fact that nobody had an easy answer. Leonardo did not erase the criticism. Joy did not dismiss his perspective. Instead, the conversation revealed something much more realistic. People can disagree and still have a meaningful discussion. Questions can be uncomfortable and still be necessary. And sometimes, the most powerful moments happen when someone refuses to take the easiest path. As the applause settles, Joy takes a moment before moving forward. The sharpness in her tone has softened. Not because she suddenly agrees with everything Leonardo said, but because she recognizes that the conversation reached a level deeper than expected. She acknowledges that Leonardo did something many guests struggle to do. He stayed with the difficult questions. He did not immediately run from criticism. He did not try to turn the moment into a simple defense of his reputation. He engaged. And that changes the way the audience views the exchange. Because authenticity is not always about having the perfect response. Sometimes it is about being willing to sit in an uncomfortable conversation and continue anyway. Leonardo remains calm. He knows the discussion will not convince everyone. And perhaps that is the point. The goal was never to make every person in the room agree. The goal was to create a conversation where people could think, question, and form their own opinions. The segment begins moving toward its conclusion, but the feeling inside the studio remains different. Everyone knows the most memorable part of the interview has already happened. Not a joke, not a headline, not a dramatic argument. A moment of honesty. a moment where a famous actor was challenged directly and responded in a way that forced everyone watching to consider a bigger question. What does accountability really look like? And that question does not disappear when the interview ends. It follows everyone beyond the studio, because the most powerful conversations are not always the ones that provide a final answer. Sometimes they are the ones that leave people thinking long after the last word is spoken. The moment inside the studio may have ended, but the conversation is only beginning. Because when a powerful exchange happens on live television, it does not stay contained within the walls of the studio. It moves. It spreads. And before long, millions of people begin forming their own opinions about what they just witnessed. The interview becomes more than a segment from The View. It becomes a discussion happening everywhere. People begin analyzing every part of the conversation. The questions Joy asked, the way Leonardo responded, the pauses between their answers, the moments when the energy inside the room shifted. Because that is what happens when a public conversation touches something bigger than the people involved. Everyone sees it differently. Some viewers praise Leonardo for staying calm under pressure. They argue that instead of becoming defensive, he acknowledged criticism and engaged with the difficult questions. To them, the most surprising part was not that he had an answer. It was that he allowed himself to be questioned. They point to his willingness to admit imperfection as the reason the conversation felt different from a typical celebrity interview. But not everyone sees it the same way. Other viewers remain skeptical. They argue that acknowledging a problem is only the first step. They believe public figures should be judged by whether their actions truly match their words. For them, the conversation raises another important question. Is a thoughtful explanation enough, or should real accountability always be measured by visible results? And that is what makes the moment continue long after the interview ends. Because there is no single reaction, no universal conclusion, no simple answer. Instead, the conversation divides people into different perspectives. Some see honesty. Others see careful communication. Some believe Leonardo changed the entire discussion. Others believe the original questions still remain unanswered. And as people continue debating, something unexpected happens. The conversation begins moving away from Leonardo DiCaprio alone. It becomes a larger discussion about celebrities, influence, and the expectations placed on people who have a public voice. Should famous people be held to a higher standard? Should someone lose credibility because they are imperfect? Can someone create meaningful change while still being part of the problems they discuss? These questions begin appearing everywhere because they are not only about one actor. They are questions that apply to anyone with influence. The interview becomes a reminder that public conversations are rarely as simple as they appear. A single moment can contain multiple interpretations. A single answer can create support from some people and criticism from others. And sometimes, the reason a moment becomes memorable is not because everyone agrees. It is because everyone has something to say about it. The exchange between Leonardo and Joy becomes the type of conversation people continue revisiting. They replay the arguments. They analyze the responses. They debate who made the stronger point. But beneath all those opinions, one thing remains clear. The interview created a reaction. It made people stop. It made people think. And in a world where countless conversations disappear almost instantly, that alone makes the moment stand out. Because the most powerful public discussions are not always the ones where someone wins. Sometimes they are the ones that force everyone watching to ask themselves a difficult question. What do we truly expect from the people we choose to listen to? And as the conversation continues beyond the studio, one thing becomes undeniable. The interview was no longer just about Leonardo DiCaprio and Joy Behar. It became a reflection of a much larger debate happening around the world. Days after the conversation ends, the moment continues to stay in people's minds. The cameras may have stopped rolling. The studio may have returned to normal. But the questions raised during that exchange remain. And that is what separates an ordinary interview from a memorable one. Most conversations disappear quickly. A headline appears. People react. A few days later, everyone moves on. But some moments are different. Some moments create a reaction that lasts because they touch on something deeper than the people involved. And that is exactly what happened here. The discussion between Leonardo DiCaprio and Joy Behar was never only about one question or one answer. It became a conversation about trust, about responsibility, about what people expect from those who have the ability to influence millions. Because at the center of everything was a question that has no easy answer. How should we judge people who are trying to create change while still being imperfect themselves? That question is what made the exchange so powerful. It was not a simple argument where one person proved the other wrong. It was not a moment where everyone walked away with the same opinion. Instead, it created something much more realistic. A conversation that allowed people to disagree. A conversation that forced people to think. Leonardo entered the studio as one of the most recognizable actors in the world. But by the end of the conversation, the focus was no longer only on his career or his fame. It was on a much bigger idea. The responsibility that comes with having a voice. The challenge of being judged by millions of people. And the difficult reality that public figures are often expected to represent ideals that even they are still working toward. Joy Behar's questions represented the concerns many viewers have. People want honesty. They want consistency. They want to know that the messages they hear from influential figures are supported by genuine actions. And Leonardo's responses represented another side of the discussion. The idea that progress does not always come from perfect people. Sometimes it comes from people who recognize problems, accept criticism, and continue trying to improve. That difference in perspective is what made the exchange memorable. Because both sides touched on something true. Accountability matters. But so does the willingness to change. The conversation remained powerful because it did not provide a simple conclusion. It left room for debate. It left room for different interpretations. And perhaps that was the most important part. In a time when many discussions quickly become divided into winners and losers, this moment created something different. It encouraged people to look deeper, to question their own assumptions, to consider whether they judge others too quickly or whether they sometimes ignore important criticism. The impact of the conversation came from the fact that people could see themselves somewhere within it. Everyone has faced questions about their choices. Everyone has experienced the difference between intention and action. Everyone understands that growth is rarely immediate. And that is why the exchange connected with so many people. It was not only about a celebrity. It was about a human experience. Trying to do better. Being questioned. Making mistakes. Learning. Continuing forward. As the discussion faded from the headlines, the questions remained. Because the most unforgettable moments are not always the ones that create the loudest reactions. Sometimes, they are the ones that stay quietly in people's thoughts. The ones people return to later. The ones that make them reconsider how they see the world. And that is why this conversation between Leonardo DiCaprio and Joy Behar became more than just another television interview. It became a reminder that the hardest conversations are often the most important ones. Because sometimes the moments that challenge us the most are the moments we remember the longest. And in the end, the biggest question was never only about Leonardo DiCaprio. It was about everyone watching. When someone stands in front of the world and asks to be heard, what truly makes us believe them? That is the question that remained long after the studio lights went dark. The conversation may have ended inside the studio, but the impact of that moment continues far beyond the cameras. Because the most unforgettable interviews are not always remembered because of a shocking argument or a dramatic ending. Sometimes they are remembered because they leave people with something to think about. And that is exactly what happened here. What began as a simple celebrity appearance turned into a much deeper discussion about trust, accountability, and the impossible expectations placed on people who live their lives in the public eye. Leonardo DiCaprio walked onto the stage as a Hollywood icon. But for those moments, he was not just an actor. He was someone being questioned, someone being challenged, someone forced to confront the difficult space between public expectations and personal responsibility. And Joy Behar did what she has always been known for doing. She asked the questions many people were thinking. She pushed beyond the comfortable answers. She challenged the person sitting across from her to explain not only what he believes, but why anyone should believe him. And perhaps the most surprising part was that neither side walked away with a simple victory. There was no clear winner, no perfect answer, no moment where every person watching suddenly agreed. Instead, there was something much more realistic. A conversation, a real exchange of different perspectives. A reminder that some of the most important discussions are not the ones where everyone thinks the same way. They are the ones that make people stop and question their own views. Because at the center of everything was a question that extends far beyond one celebrity or one television show. How do we decide who deserves our trust? Do we expect perfection from the people who speak publicly? Or do we look at their actions, their growth, and their willingness to accept criticism? That answer is different for everyone. Some viewers may see Leonardo's response as a sign of honesty. Others may believe the questions raised by Joy remain unanswered. And that is exactly why the conversation stayed with people. Because it did not tell them what to think. It gave them something to think about. Long after the interview ended, the discussion continued. People debated the questions. They analyzed the answers. They shared their own opinions. But beneath all the arguments, one thing remained clear. A powerful conversation does not always have to provide a final conclusion. Sometimes its greatest impact comes from creating more questions. And maybe that is what made this moment different. For a few minutes, the usual patterns of celebrity interviews disappeared. The polished responses, the predictable exchanges, the carefully controlled conversations. Instead, audiences witnessed a discussion where difficult questions were allowed to exist, where disagreement did not automatically become conflict, and where two people with different perspectives created a moment that encouraged millions of viewers to reflect. So now the question moves away from Leonardo DiCaprio and Joy Behar. It moves to you. When you watched this conversation unfold, what did you see? Was it a celebrity defending himself under pressure? Was it a host asking the questions that needed to be asked? Or was it something more complicated? A reminder that real conversations rarely fit into simple categories? Share your thoughts, because the most interesting part of any conversation is what happens after the final words are spoken. And if you enjoy stories about unexpected moments, powerful exchanges, and the conversations that capture worldwide attention, make sure to subscribe, like, and stay connected for more unforgettable stories. Because sometimes the moments that are never planned become the moments people remember forever.